Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you missed the monster standing right beside you? Ramen Fix was a king in Chicago's underworld until the night he came home early and heard two words that would destroy his world. Stay silent. Not from an enemy, not from a rival, but from the waitress he barely noticed, standing in his own penthouse at 2 a.m., her finger pressed desperately to her lips. What was she hiding? Who was she protecting him from? And why, in his own home, did the most dangerous man in Chicago suddenly feel like prey? The answer was in the next room, and it would leave him frozen with horror. If a story that grabs you by the throat from the very first second is what you crave, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell because we're about to take you on a journey into darkness, betrayal, and the kind of truth that changes everything. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever discovered something about someone you trusted that made you question everything? Let's talk about it. Now, let's dive in. Ramen Fix didn't believe in ghosts, but standing in his Chicago penthouse at 2 a.m. with blood still fresh on his cufflinks, he wondered if the trembling woman before him might be one. Teresa Widra wasn't supposed to be there. She was the weekend waitress at his private club, a quiet woman with downcast eyes who served drinks and disappeared into the background. She'd been working for him for 3 months, and he'd probably spoken to her a total of 5 times. Yet here she was, in his home, in the darkness, pressing her finger to her lips with an urgency that made his blood run cold. Don't let her hear you. In Ramen's world, people didn't tell him what to do. He gave orders that ended lives and kept fragile peace between Chicago's most dangerous families. His word was law. His presence commanded silence. But something in Teresa's dark eyes, terror mixed with steel determination, made him freeze where he stood. "What the hell is going on in my house?" His voice came out deadly low, the kind of quiet that usually preceded violence. Teresa grabbed his arm with surprising strength, pulling him toward the shadows near the grand piano. Her whisper was urgent, desperate. 60 seconds. Trust me. Please. No one called Ramen Fix please. Not his soldiers, not his business partners, not even Willie, his fiancé, who preferred darling in that honey-sweet voice that had once made him believe in second chances. But Teresa said it like a prayer, like those 60 seconds were the difference between salvation and damnation. They moved through shadows Ramen knew intimately. This was his domain, his fortress. As they approached the playroom, Teresa positioned him behind a marble column, then pointed through the doorway. And Ramen Fix, the man who had stared down death 100 times without flinching, felt his heart stop. His daughter knelt on the Persian rug, small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Damien stood rigid beside her, hands clasped like a prisoner awaiting execution. And towering over them both, pacing in designer heels, was Willie Martial, his fiancée, the daughter of Antonio Martial, the woman he was supposed to marry in 3 months. "You think crying will change anything, Isabella? Your father isn't here. He's never here. And when he is, he's too weak to do what's necessary." Ramen's vision blurred red. "Weak children become dead weight," Willie continued, her voice cold as frost on the windows. "In my family, we eliminate dead weight. Be grateful I'm only teaching you discipline." She crouched to Isabella's eye level, her manicured hand gripping the child's chin, forcing eye contact. "Tell me what you are." Isabella's tiny voice whispered, barely audible. "Worthless." The word detonated in Ramen's chest like a grenade. His hand moved instinctively toward the Glock at his side. He would end this, end her, consequences damned. But Teresa stopped him with a grip like iron, her entire body pressing him against the wall with desperate strength. "Don't yet," she whispered, her voice cutting through the haze of rage. "If you go in there now, she'll twist it. She'll threaten to leave, take the Martial alliance with her, and you'll lose everything, including them. You know this game."
Raman knew. God help him, he knew it all too well. His engagement to Willie Martial wasn't about love. It was a treaty written in blood and money, a merger between two criminal empires. Breaking it meant war, and wars had casualties. But his child was kneeling on that floor, calling herself worthless while he stood in the shadows like a coward. What kind of father was he? What kind of monster had he brought into his children's lives? And most terrifying of all, how long had this been happening? Teresa pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen glowing in the darkness like a beacon of terrible truth. You need to see this before you do anything. She pressed play. The video appeared, filmed from above, perhaps from a hidden camera in the chandelier.
Raman recognized his own living room, recognized the expensive furniture he'd bought, the artwork he'd commissioned. He recognized Damien, his son, being dragged by his hair across the marble floor. By Willie. The boy made no sound, no crying, no screaming, just teeth clenched in silent endurance, like a small warrior who had grown too familiar with pain. When did this? Raman started, but Teresa cut him off with another video. Isabella sat in the corner, tears streaming down her chubby cheeks. Willie walked over, and without warning, her hand swung upward. Crack! The slap echoed through the phone speaker. Isabella stumbled sideways but didn't dare cry out loud, her hand pressed to her reddening cheek. Then Willie's voice, cold enough to freeze hell. Your mother was weak, too. That's why she died. The screen went dark. Raman realized his hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage so consuming it threatened to devour him whole. His fingers found the Glock's grip, muscle memory and murder instinct taking over. Teresa's hand covered his. 12 recordings like this. 3 months I'd been watching. 3 months. Raman's voice came out like the growl of a wounded animal. 3 months? 90 days, more than 2,000 hours. His children had endured hell while he built his empire, believing they were safe. Why? He demanded, his voice cracking. Why did you watch? Why did you record? Who the hell are you? Teresa looked at him, and in those dark eyes, Raman saw something that made him pause. Not fear, but purpose. Mission. I'm the one who's been waiting for you to come home early for 3 months, she said quietly. The one who will tell you the truth. She paused, letting that sink in. But not now. Right now, you need to stay silent and observe, because what you just saw, her eyes hardened, that's only the tip of the iceberg. Before Raman could demand answers, a sound cut through the darkness, a phone ringing from the playroom, its cheerful melody mocking the nightmare unfolding. Teresa tightened her grip on his arm, pulling him deeper into shadow. Through the doorway, they watched Willie pull her phone out, glance at the screen, then raise a finger to silence the children. She stepped toward the window overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline, her back to Damien and Isabella. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but 15 years in the underworld had trained Raman to catch confessions in crowded nightclubs. Now those same ears captured every fragment of Willie's conversation. Tomorrow night, the documents are ready. Raman held his breath. He suspects nothing. A quiet laugh escaped Willie's crimson lips, the laugh of someone who believed victory was already in hand. Then came the sentence that froze Raman's blood solid. The children will no longer be a problem. A problem. His children were a problem to be solved. Willie ended the call, slipped her phone into her pocket, and turned back to the children with a smile, the same smile Raman had once believed was love. Now then, time for bed, she said sweetly, approaching the terrified children. She placed a hand on each child's shoulder, fingers digging into their thin pajamas. And remember, if you say anything to your father, I'll make sure you never see him again. Isabella trembled. There are schools very far away, Willie continued, her voice still sweet but cold as winter.
Places where airplanes take 2 days to reach, where no one knows who you are, where you'll be completely alone. She tilted her head, smile never faltering. Do you understand? Damien nodded first, mechanical, soulless, like a robot following programming. Then Isabella, eyes still wet but no more tears falling, nodded after her brother. Good children. Willie straightened up, brushing off her hands. Now go to your rooms. The children walked away, small hands finding each other in the darkness, holding tight as if afraid the other would vanish. Raman watched them disappear down the hallway, and something inside him shattered beyond repair. Not his heart had hardened long ago. It was his belief, the belief that no matter who he was or what he did, at least his children were safe in their own home.
Damien had seen his father standing just steps away, had recognized salvation within reach, yet still chose to walk into darkness because he knew one sound, one wrong move could make everything worse. His son had learned to trust no one, not even his own father. That look, that brief moment when father and son's eyes met and parted, broke something in Raman that no bullet, no blade, no torture had ever reached. Isabella followed her brother, completely unaware her father stood in the shadows. She was too small, too tired, too accustomed to keeping her head down. The two small figures faded into the hallway's end, and Raman stood frozen, hand still gripping the Glock, eyes fixed on empty space where his son had just looked at him with dying hope. Teresa touched his elbow gently. She checks their rooms at 3 a.m. every night to make sure they haven't tried calling anyone. Her voice was urgent but calm. We have 1 hour. Raman swallowed hard, throat dry as sand. 1 hour for what? Teresa looked straight into his eyes. To get them somewhere safe, to understand what those documents are, to find out why your children won't be a problem after tomorrow night. 1 hour, 60 minutes, 3,600 seconds to save the children he'd failed to protect for 3 months. Raman looked toward the children's bedroom where Damien and Isabella lay in darkness, perhaps pretending to sleep, perhaps praying for a miracle they'd stopped believing in. Lead the way, he said to Teresa, his voice low and solid as a vow. I won't waste another second. Before they could move, a scream tore through the night, Isabella's scream, high and desperate, echoing through the penthouse like an alarm shattering the silence. Raman didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't care if Willie heard. He ran. The instinct of a father blazed fiercer than any survival instinct he'd possessed in 15 years as Chicago's underworld king. His feet flew down the hallway, heart pounding like it would burst from his chest. His daughter was screaming. He reached the bedroom in seconds, shoulder slamming the doorframe as he rushed in too fast. But when he arrived, the screaming had stopped. In its place was something far more painful, muffled sobbing, crying strangled into near silence, the sound of a child who'd learned to suffer without making noise. In the faint moonlight, Raman saw Damien sitting on Isabella's bed. The 7-year-old was covering his sister's mouth with one small hand, while his other arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders, trying to hold her together before she shattered. The boy was doing the work adults should have done, protecting his sister, keeping her quiet, shielding her from the monster in the next room. When Damien looked up and saw his father in the doorway, the boy's face crumbled, not from fear, but from collision of opposing emotions, relief and terror, hope and despair. "Nightmare, Papa," Damien said, voice trembling but fighting for control. He removed his hand from Isabella's mouth, small fingers quickly wiping tears from Isabella's cheeks. "She just had a nightmare. It's nothing. We're fine." 7 years old, and his son had already learned to use lies as shields, to hide truth as survival tactic, to understand that in this house, honesty was a dangerous luxury.
Raman stepped into the bed and closed the door behind him. He walked to the bed and knelt before his children, placing himself at their eye level, something he'd never done before. In his world, people knelt before him, but tonight he was willing to kneel before two small souls who'd endured hell because of his absence. "I know," he said, his voice so choked he barely recognized it. I heard everything." He raised his hands, touching Damien's cheek, then Isabella's, wiping away tears still wet on their faces. "And I swear on your mother's memory, she will never hurt you again. Never." Isabella looked up, large eyes red from crying, lips trembling. "You know about Miss Willie?" Her voice was tiny, afraid that speaking louder would make everything real. "You know she... "I know everything, my little princess," Raman whispered, throat tightening with pain. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner." Damien remained frozen, not yet daring to believe. "Do you promise?" The boy's voice shook. She said if we told you, she'd send us away to schools very far away where you could never find us." Rage ignited in Raman's chest, but he forced it down. Now wasn't the time for anger. Now was the time for gentleness these children had been denied too long. "Look at me," he said, voice solid as steel. "You are not broken. Do you hear me? You are not worthless. You are not a burden. You are my children, my flesh and blood, the only thing in this world that truly matters." He pulled both children into his arms, holding them tight as if someone might tear them away. "And no one, do you hear me? No one in this world can take you from me. You belong to me, and no one takes what's mine." In his arms, the two small bodies trembled. Then Damien cried. For the first time in 3 months, the boy allowed himself to truly cry, not muffled, not suppressed, but loud and raw and real. Isabella cried with him, sobs bursting forth like water breaking through a dam that had held back the flood far too long. And Raman held his children tight, making a promise to himself. Even if he had to burn all of Chicago to the ground, he would keep this vow. A soft knock interrupted their reunion. Teresa slipped into the room like a ghost, face tense under pale moonlight. The light in Willie's bedroom just turned on. She may have heard the scream. Her voice was urgent but remarkably calm. "We need to move right now."
If you were Rockman right now, knowing your children's lives are in danger, knowing your fiancé is plotting your murder, knowing you have maybe minutes before she discovers your home, what would you do? Run? Fight? Call the police? Drop your answer in the comments because honestly, there are no good options here. Rockman stood, one hand still on Damien's shoulder, the other holding Isabella's tiny hand. "Where? Willie controls every way in and out of this house." "Not every way," Teresa replied, a thin smile briefly crossing her lips. "Follow me." They left the bedroom in silence. Teresa led them to a decorative wooden panel at the dead end of the service hallway, a wall Rockman passed every day without a second thought. "Impossible," Rockman whispered, voice tense. "My security team swept this penthouse before I moved in. Thermal scanners, sonar, they checked every inch." "Your men were looking for heat signatures and electronic bugs, Rockman," Teresa replied, fingers tracing carved flowers on the wood. "They weren't looking for empty space." She pressed a sequence of flowers, not buttons, but mechanical latches hidden within the design. Click. The wall didn't slide, it swung inward like a heavy vault door, revealing darkness beyond. "Prohibition era," Teresa explained, her voice echoing slightly. "A smuggler's hideout, lined with lead and concrete, impervious to thermal scans, invisible to sonar." Rockman stared into the void. "How? How did you find this when my best men failed?" "I measured," Teresa said simply, stepping into darkness. "The hallway is 4 feet shorter on the inside than the blueprints say it should be on the outside. Mathematics doesn't lie." Rockman looked at her, really looked at her.
He didn't ask why a waitress would measure his home's architectural dimensions. He was beginning to understand that Teresa Wydra was far more dangerous and far more brilliant than he'd ever imagined. They moved through the narrow passage, dust thick on walls, but floor clean. Someone had been using this route regularly. Damien gripped his father's hand tightly. Isabella was carried in Rockman's arms, her head resting against his shoulder, as if she'd finally found a safe place to rest. Teresa stopped before an old door, paint peeling and hinges rusted, but when she pushed it open, what lay inside made Rockman freeze. This wasn't a forgotten room. This was a surveillance center. 3 computer monitors displayed images from cameras throughout the penthouse, living room, dining room, children's playroom, even the master bedroom where Willie now stood, posture tense, eyes fixed on the door as if listening for something. Beside the monitors sat an open laptop with dozens of file folders, stacks of documents arranged neatly on shelves, each labeled with dates. And beneath a sheet draped over a single chair, Rockman recognized the familiar shape of a Glock 19. "Insurance," Teresa said, closing the door behind them. "Everything Willie has done over the past 3 months, every word, every action, every slap and threat, all recorded." Rockman set Isabella down on the chair. The little girl had fallen asleep from exhaustion. Damien stood beside his sister, one hand resting on her shoulder. Even in sleep, the boy never stopped protecting her. Rockman turned to Teresa, looking at her in entirely different eyes. No longer the gaze of a master looking at a servant, but the gaze of a man trying to solve a dangerous puzzle. "You're not a waitress." Not a question, a statement. "Who are you really?" Teresa didn't answer immediately. She walked to the desk, fingers brushing over stacks of files as if touching painful memories. When she turned back, there was something in her eyes Rockman recognized instantly. The fire of hatred, of pain that had ripened into purpose. "I'm someone who made a promise to a woman who died. Someone who's been waiting for you to come home early for 3 months, waiting for the moment you'd see the truth with your own eyes." Rockman's heart clenched. My wife, Catherine. The name escaped him like prayer and curse at once. Catherine, the woman he'd loved, who died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving him with 2 children and a shattered heart. Teresa shook her head, but not in complete denial. "Not exactly, but your children aren't the only ones Willie Marcial has destroyed." She turned to the laptop, fingers gliding across the keyboard. A folder opened. On the screen appeared a photograph of a young woman. Rockman stared, feeling familiarity creep through his mind. The eyes in the photograph resembled Teresa's, same deep dark brown, but softer, warmer, as if this woman looked at the world believing in goodness, while Teresa looked at the world through eyes that had lost that faith. "Natalie Wydra," Teresa said, voice falling as she spoke the name. "My sister. She worked as an accountant for you 3 years ago, downtown office. She handled books for your legitimate businesses." Memories crashed over Rockman like a wave. He remembered Natalie Wydra, young woman with radiant smile and quick fingers on the keyboards. She'd worked for him over a year, never asking questions that shouldn't be asked, never curious about where money came from. A perfect employee. Then one day, she stopped coming to the office. The news said she was killed in a robbery gone wrong. Wrong place, wrong time. Rockman had sent flowers to the funeral, a white wreath with condolences, even sent money to her family as a gesture of respect. Then he'd continued with his life, continued with work, continued forgetting. "I remember," Rockman said, voice growing heavy. "The robbery. I sent flowers." Teresa turned back, and in her eyes blazed fire Rockman recognized instantly. The fire of hatred, of pain that had ripened into purpose. "It wasn't a robbery." Teresa's voice was cold as steel tempered in ice. "The Marcial family killed my sister. Antonio Marcial gave the order. His men carried it out." She paused, swallowing hard as if next words were glass shards cutting her throat.
"They tortured her first, for 2 days. They wanted information about your operations, about your money flows, about weaknesses they could exploit." The room seemed to shrink, air growing thick.
She didn't say a word, Teresa continued, voice trembling but resolute. 2 days of torture and she never breathed a syllable. Not because she was loyal to you, but because she knew if the Marseilles got that information, they'd come for you. She looked straight at Ramon. And if they came for you, they'd find the 2 children. She died to protect Damien and Isabella, 2 children she'd never even met. Ramon felt his knees weaken. A woman he barely remembered had endured hell and death to protect his children, while he'd sent flowers and continued forgetting. "You came here for revenge," he said, not a question. Teresa placed her hand on the screen, finger gently touching her sister's face. "I came here to find truth. When I discovered who was behind my sister's death, I made a plan. Infiltrate Ramon Fix's life, gather evidence, then destroy him." She turned back, looking straight into Ramon's eyes without fear. "I thought you were a monster. Thought you knew how my sister died and did nothing. Thought you deserved punishment just as much as the Marseilles." Heavy silence hung between them. "But then I watched," Teresa continued, voice softening slightly. 3 months living in this house. I saw you looking at photographs of Catherine with pain that couldn't be faked. Saw you standing in her room for hours in the middle of the night, talking to someone who was no longer there. She stepped closer, only 1 step away now. I saw your children waiting by the window every evening, eyes fixed on the street below, hoping their father would come home early today. And I saw Willie systematically destroying them while you drowned in guilt, completely unaware of the hell unfolding under your own roof. Another step closer. You're not a monster, Ramon Fix. You're a broken man trying to survive, just like me. So what do you want now? Ramon asked, voice rough. Teresa looked toward the chair where Damien sat, hand still resting on his sleeping sister's shoulder. Her eyes softened. I want Willie to pay for everything she's done, and I want to save the children my sister died to protect. She turned back to Ramon, voice solid as a vow. That's the only thing left I can do for Natalie. Okay, real talk. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you even doing? This story has secret passages, hidden surveillance rooms, dead sisters, murder plots, and we haven't even gotten to the really dark part yet. Subscribe now before you forget and then spend 3 hours searching that story about the Mafia boss and the waitress who wasn't really a waitress. Save yourself the trouble. Click that button. We'll wait. Good? Okay, let's continue. Teresa turned back to the laptop, opening more folders she'd created over 3 months. Each file appeared on screen like pieces of a horrifying puzzle Ramon had never imagined. First, screenshots of search history from Willie's personal computer. 6 weeks ago, her beautiful fiancé had typed keywords into the search bar that no one with good intentions would ever need. Poison that leaves no trace. Substances that cause natural heart failure. How to make death look like heart disease. Dozens of search results, dozens of medical websites and underground forums, all meticulously researched by Willie, as if preparing for an important exam. She clicked to the next file. 4 weeks ago, a secretly taken photograph of Willie stepping out of an estate lawyer's office in Chicago's Gold Coast district. Beside it, a copy of documents Teresa had somehow obtained. A new will for Ramon Fix, amended so Willie Marseille would become sole heir in the event he and his children died. Ramon's signature at the bottom of the page, perfect down to every stroke. A forgery indistinguishable from the real thing, Ramon whispered, voice catching in his throat. She's forged my signature, Teresa replied, opening another file. 2 weeks ago, photographs taken at an upscale restaurant in Chicago's suburbs. Willie sat across from 2 men Ramon recognized immediately, Luca Bernardi and Vincent Cross, 2 notorious assassins of the Marseille family. Men Antonio Marseille only summoned when problems needed to be solved permanently. In the photograph, Willie was smiling, raising a wine glass as if celebrating something. Perhaps celebrating the upcoming deaths of him and his children. Then the final file. Yesterday, video from a security camera Teresa had installed in Willie's bedroom. The footage showed a delivery man arriving, handing Willie a small box wrapped in brown paper.
When Willie opened the box in her private room, the camera clearly recorded what was inside. A vial of clear, labelless liquid, a set of medical syringes, and a small piece of paper with handwritten text that Willie read, then burned in an ashtray. Digitalis, Teresa explained, cold as if reading a scientific report. Extracted from the foxglove plant, used in medicine to treat heart conditions in controlled doses. She paused, looking at Ramon with eyes heavy with terrible knowledge. But in the hands of someone with malicious intent, it becomes the perfect weapon. Small doses cause symptoms resembling stress, fatigue, nausea, irregular heartbeat. Doctors would think it was from work pressure, tension, lack of sleep. She let that sink in. Larger doses cause cardiac arrest, and by the time anyone suspects enough to request an autopsy, the poison has completely degraded, no trace left. Ramon felt his stomach rising into his throat. He'd faced death many times, had stared down gun barrels without blinking, had ordered men killed without hesitation, but never had he felt this nauseous. "She was planning to kill us," he said, the words escaping like a whisper of a man receiving a death sentence. Teresa nodded grimly.
The children first. A tragic accident, perhaps a fall down the stairs, perhaps food poisoning, perhaps drowning in the bathtub. Willie would weep and grieve in front of everyone. No one would suspect the devastated stepmother. Her voice was bitter as venom. Then you. Slowly, the stress of losing your children would be perfect explanation for unusual symptoms. Heart failure from excessive grief, the tragic death of a father who couldn't overcome the pain of losing his children. She closed the laptop with a soft click. Perfect. Why? Rahman asked, though he was beginning to understand. What would she gain? Teresa met his eyes. Everything. Your entire inherited fortune, the empire you built over 15 years, the business relationships, shipping routes, legal and illegal investments. She paused, letting each word sink in. And her father, Antonio Marcial, would absorb your empire without firing a single shot. No war, no bloodshed, just a funeral and a forged will. Rahman looked toward his children, Damien still awake in the darkness, eyes wide, listening to everything, though understanding only fragments. Isabella asleep with head on her brother's shoulder, carefree in the sleep of childhood. These two small souls had been marked for death by the woman he'd been about to marry. When? He asked, voice low like a predator's growl. When was she planning to strike? Teresa looked at the clock on the wall. Tomorrow night. The documents are ready. The children will no longer be a problem. You heard that call. She met his eyes. We have less than 24 hours. Rahman stood in the secret room, pale blue light from computer screens casting strange shadows across his face. His eyes were fixed on the corner where Damien sat, back against the wall, Isabella's head resting on his shoulder. Both had fallen asleep from exhaustion, young faces finally relaxed after hours of tension. In their dreams, perhaps they didn't have to be afraid. In their dreams, perhaps they were still normal children with normal lives. Rahman knew he had two choices. First choice, war. Call his men, mobilize his forces, confront the Marcial family head-on. He had enough firepower, enough loyal soldiers, enough connections to turn Chicago into a battlefield. But war meant blood, meant death, meant stray bullets and explosions that didn't distinguish between adults and children, and his children would be caught right in the middle of that war. Second choice, run. Leave Chicago behind. Leave the empire he'd built over 15 years with sweat, tears, and blood. Leave the identity of Rahman Fix, the name that made people tremble, the name that carried power and respect. Become nobody, a ghost vanishing into the night. Teresa watched him in silence, letting him wrestle with thoughts in his head. Then she spoke, voice gentle but certain.
I've already prepared everything. A car waiting in the abandoned parking garage on level 3, enough cash to live comfortably for several years, false identities for all 4 of us, and a safe place no one, not even the Martials, can find. Raman turned to look at her, eyes narrowing. You planned an escape from me. Since when? I planned for every possibility, Teresa replied, unflinching under his scrutinizing gaze, including the possibility that you're a good father trapped in a bad world, just as my sister believed. She paused, eyes softening as she looked toward the sleeping children. Natalie told me about you, about how you called your children every night no matter where you were, about the family photograph you always kept on your desk. She believed you didn't belong in this world. She met his eyes, and I prepared for the chance that she was right. Raman looked down at his hands. The Glock still rested there, handle familiar as part of his own body. This weapon had solved all his problems for 15 years. An enemy wanted him dead, the Glock solved it. A partner planned betrayal, the Glock solved it. Someone threatened what belonged to him, the Glock always had the answer. It was the only language he knew how to speak in this world, the language of violence, the language of power. Then he looked at Damien and Isabella, 2 small figures curled into each other in sleep, seeking warmth and safety from one another because they couldn't find it from adults. Damien's closed eyes still showed traces of sleepless nights. Isabella's cheeks still bore streaks of dried tears. These 2 small souls were all that remained of Catherine, were all that mattered in this world. If I run, Raman said, voice dropping to a whisper, I lose everything. The empire, the power, everything I've built. Teresa stepped closer, standing directly in front of him. If you stay, she replied, voice without hesitation, you lose them. 2 choices. 1 decision, and Raman Fix, the man who'd never hesitated before any life or death decision, for the first time in his life felt his hands trembling. He looked at the Glock one last time. The cold weapon gleamed under screen light, like a reminder of the man he'd been, of what he'd done, of blood on his hands that would never wash clean. Then Raman did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He removed the gun from his body and placed it on the table with a soft sound, metal touching wood, power touching surrender. He pulled his hand back, leaving the Glock lying there like a piece of the past he was abandoning. We go, he said, voice solid as steel, right now. Do you think Raman made the right choice? Could you walk away from everything you built, your entire identity to save your family? Or would you fight, even knowing your children could become collateral damage? This is the impossible choice. Comment below what you would do. 3:47 a.m. The clock on the wall ticked each second like a countdown to the end of the world. Teresa woke the children gently, soft whispers pulling them from brief sleep.
Damien opened his eyes immediately. Ingrained instinct for alertness, meaning he needed no time to become fully awake. Isabella took a few seconds longer, small eyes opening with confusion before recognizing her father standing beside her. We have to go now, Raman said to the children, voice gentle but unable to hide urgency. No making any noise. Do everything Miss Teresa tells you, understand? Damien nodded without protest. Isabella only looked up at her father and reached her arms up to be carried. Raman lifted her, arms holding her small body tight against his chest. Isabella wrapped her arms around his neck, head resting on his shoulder as if it were the safest place in the world, and Raman swore he would make that true. Teresa led the way through the secret corridor, footsteps making no sound. Damien held her hand tightly, small fingers wrapped around the hand of the woman he'd called the waitress just hours before. They moved through narrow passages and spiral staircases Raman had never known existed, descending deep into the building until they reached a heavy steel door.
Teresa entered a code on the keypad. The door opened with a soft click. They stepped into an abandoned parking garage Raman had no idea existed right beneath his feet. The car waiting in the corner wasn't Raman's gleaming black Mercedes, not the Bentley or Range Rover he usually drove. It was an old Honda Civic, silver paint faded, a few dents on the front bumper, the kind of car people see hundreds of times daily and never remember. The perfect car for disappearing. Teresa sat in the driver's seat. Raman placed Isabella in the back, then sat beside his daughter. Damien climbed in on the other side, immediately pressing close to his sister. The engine started with a soft hum, and the car rolled out of the garage through an exit Raman had never known existed. They drove through Chicago in the night. Familiar streets drifted past windows. Buildings Raman owned, restaurants where he'd negotiated million-dollar deals, street corners where he'd built his empire from nothing. City lights flickered in the rear-view mirror, and with each mile traveled, the past receded further. Raman Fix was dying, not by bullet or blade, but by choice. He was burying with his own hands the man he'd been for 15 years. 30 minutes after they left the penthouse, the phone in Raman's pocket vibrated. He pulled it out, screen glowing in darkness with a familiar name. Willie. He looked at that name for several seconds, thinking of her smile, thinking of sweet words she'd once spoken, thinking of how she'd made his daughter kneel and call herself worthless. Then he pressed decline, powered off the phone, removed the SIM card, and threw it through the half-lowered window. The small piece of plastic vanished into the night, carrying with it the last thread connecting him to his old life. They were on the highway heading north when Teresa glanced into the rearview mirror, eyes suddenly sharpening. "We have a tail," Teresa said, voice strangely calm. Raman turned to look behind them. 2 black SUVs were following, headlights blazing, distance shrinking. He recognized the type, the black Escalades that Martial's men favored. "How did they find us?" Raman asked, hand instinctively reaching for his hip where the Glock usually sat, then remembering he'd left it behind. "Teresa certainly put trackers in your car, your phone, possibly even your clothes," Teresa replied, eyes never leaving the mirror. "But they're tracking the devices, not us. They didn't expect us to switch cars." Teresa pressed the accelerator, and the aging Civic roared as if awakening from long sleep. She turned right sharply, plunging into a narrow road between warehouse buildings. Another left turn, another right. She drove like someone who'd studied every road, every alley, every shortcut in this city, like someone trained for this exact moment. In the back seat, Damien held his sister tight, small body shielding Isabella like a human shield. He didn't cry, didn't scream, only held her and closed his eyes, lips moving in what might have been a prayer. Isabella covered her ears with tiny hands, eyes squeezed shut, trying to block out the world outside. Teresa hit the brakes, turned into an underground parking lot, killed the lights, and stopped in darkness. The 2 SUVs roared past outside, headlights sweeping across but not detecting the Civic hiding in shadows. Sound of their engines faded, then vanished. They waited, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No one spoke, only the sound of 4 people breathing in the cramped space and hearts pounding as if they'd burst from chests. Then Teresa started the car again, drove out of the parking lot, and headed north towards Wisconsin, towards freedom. Raman looked out the window as Chicago slowly disappeared behind them. His empire, his power, the man he once was, all of it receding with each mile. And he didn't look back once. 6 months later. Autumn painted the streets of Madison, Wisconsin, in gold. Maple leaves drifted onto sidewalks, and wind carried the first chill of the season through rows of trees changing colors. At 847 Maple Drive stood a modest 2-story house with white fence and small flower garden in front. Life was unfolding so normally it was almost boring. And that was exactly what those living in that house wanted most. Thomas Reynolds stood before the 10th grade classroom at Madison West High School, holding a well-worn copy of The Great Gatsby, eyes resting on attentive faces of his students. He wore a light blue shirt tucked neatly into slacks and black-framed glasses, part of his new identity provided by the Witness Protection Program. No one looking at this gentle, middle-aged man could ever imagine he'd once been Raman Fix, notorious Mafia boss of Chicago.
Fitzgerald understood that we're all boats against the current, Thomas told his students, voice calm and thoughtful. Pushed endlessly back into the past. No matter how hard we try, the past is always there, pulling us backward. He paused, looking toward the window where golden leaves drifted through wind. But that doesn't mean we stop rowing. We keep moving forward, even when the current resists us. Because the effort, the daily struggle to become better, that's what makes us human. The class bell rang. Students gathered books and bags. A few lingered to ask about assignments. Thomas answered each question with patience Ramen Fix had never possessed. When the classroom was empty, he remained seated, alone, gazing at vacant desks and wondering whether this was the life Catherine had once dreamed for him. He drove his old Toyota Camry home through peaceful streets of Madison, where neighbors waved to one another and children rode bicycles along sidewalks. So different from Chicago with its dark alleys and watchful eyes. Here, people didn't need to look over their shoulders. Here, children's laughter wasn't swallowed by sirens and distant gunfire. When Thomas opened the door and stepped inside, the scent of cooking filled the air. Sarah Reynolds sat at the kitchen table, hair loosely tied in a messy bun, glasses slipping down her nose as she graded elementary school tests. She looked up at the sound of the door and smiled naturally. "One of my students wrote in her essay that her mother can fly because she's a witch," Sarah said, voice a mixture of annoyance and amusement. "I don't know what grade to give that." Thomas laughed and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Give her a high grade for creativity." In the living room, Michael sat on the rug working on math homework, face serious in the exact same way Thomas looked whenever facing difficult problems. The boy was 8 years old now, taller and thinner than 6 months earlier, but his eyes no longer carried that frighteningly old gaze. When Sarah passed by and gently teased him about a wrong answer, Michael giggled, clear sound ringing through the room like wind chimes. Emma sat beside her brother, not doing homework but drawing with her new box of crayons. Thomas stepped closer and looked over his daughter's shoulder at the picture she was making. 4 people stood in front of a house holding hands, all smiling brightly beneath a golden sun. A father, a mother, a brother, and Emma. A family. "Who is this, princess?" Thomas asked, though he already knew. "It's us," Emma replied proudly, holding up the picture. "The Reynolds family. I made the sun really big because our house always has sunshine." That night, they ate dinner together around the oak table in the kitchen. Spaghetti with tomato sauce Sarah had cooked. Not perfect, like meals prepared by private chefs in Chicago, but better than any dinner in that cold penthouse. They talked about school, homework, Emma's new physical education teacher, Michael's new friend on the soccer team. Ordinary conversations to the point of being dull. Ordinary in a way that felt miraculous. After dinner, Thomas read to the children before bed. Harry Potter Volume 3, Chapter 12. Michael had heard the story many times, but still loved listening to his father read. Emma curled up beside him, eyes heavy with sleep, yet still struggling to stay awake until the chapter ended. But the scars were still there. They didn't disappear simply because of a new address and new name. Michael still had nightmares sometimes. On nights when he screamed in sleep, calling his sister's name, begging someone to stop, Thomas would rush into the room, gather his son into his arms, and whisper that everything was over, that he was safe now, until the boy drifted back to sleep. Emma, still startled at loud shouts, a slamming door, sudden dog bark could freeze her in terror for a few seconds before she remembered she was no longer in Chicago. Sarah still checked locks on doors 3 times every night, still glanced over her shoulder when walking down streets, still carried a small knife in her purse, even though Madison was one of the safest cities in America. And Thomas still woke drenched in cold sweat at 3 a.m., still heard Catherine calling his name in dreams, still saw Isabella kneeling on carpet, calling herself useless every time he closed his eyes. But they were healing, slowly, day by day. Every breakfast together was a small victory. Every laugh from the children was a step forward. Every night they slept safely in their little house on Maple Drive was a reminder that the past didn't have to define the future. Autumn night fell over Maple Drive in perfect quiet.
Last golden leaves drifted gently on sidewalks, and lights from surrounding houses gradually went out as the neighborhood slipped into sleep. Thomas and Sarah sat on the porch, 2 cups of hot tea in their hands, shoulders touching in the early season chill. The children slept soundly inside, peaceful sleep of children who were finally safe. Sarah looked out at the empty street, voice gently breaking silence. "Do you ever miss it? The power, the respect, the feeling of knowing exactly who you were and where you belonged?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. He looked up at the night sky where stars flickered, something he'd never had time to notice when he was ramen fix. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and forget where I am, forget who I am now, and for a few seconds I remember the feeling of walking into a room and watching everyone fall silent. I remember the feeling of absolute power. Then I remember that version of me is the one that got Catherine killed. I remember that because of that man, my son had to learn how to be silent in order to survive.
And my daughter had to kneel and call herself useless." He took a deep breath, looking at the woman who'd given him a second chance. "This life is better, Sarah. This quiet, this normalcy. Being able to watch our children laugh every day. Coming home knowing no one is waiting to harm my family. That's a luxury Rockman Fix never had." Sarah took his hand, fingers entwining as naturally as if they'd been made for one another. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to rustling wind through trees and distant sound of crickets in the garden. Then Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Sarah looked at the box, then at him, eyes widening in surprise. "I never asked you the right way," Thomas said, opening the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, no diamond, no display, just a plain band with one word engraved inside. "Together." "We got married for cover," Thomas said, holding both her hands, "because the witness protection program needed us to look like a family. But that's not why I want to be with you." He leaned in close, voice dropping to a whisper the wind couldn't carry to neighbors. "Teresa Wydra, or Sarah Reynolds. The name on the paper doesn't matter. I love the woman underneath." He met her eyes. "Will you marry me? Truly marry me? Not for cover, but because I love you. Because I can't imagine this life without you. Because you saved me, saved my children, and gave me the chance to begin again." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks. She couldn't speak, only nodded, then nodded again as if afraid he might not understand. Then she leaned in and kissed him, the kiss salty with tears and sweet with happiness. That night, lying beside one another in the small bedroom of their modest house on Maple Drive, Thomas thought about the journey that had brought him here. From criminal empire to literature teacher, from luxury penthouse to ordinary 2-story home, from Rockman Fix to Thomas Reynolds, from violence to peace, from collapse to healing. He reached for the locket on the nightstand, the only thing from his old life he still carried. Inside had once been only one photograph of Catherine. Now there were 3. Catherine on the left, gentle smile forever frozen in time. Rockman in the center, an old photograph from before everything shattered. And Teresa on the right, steady gaze of the woman who'd given him reason to keep living. The past, the present, the future. 3 pieces of one life. "Some scars never fade," he whispered into darkness, fingers brushing lightly against the locket. "But in the right hands, they become proof of survival." He paused, thinking of his children sleeping safely down the hall. And survival is simply another way of speaking about love. Outside the window, Madison slept peacefully beneath the quiet autumn night. Stars still shimmered in the sky, indifferent to tragedies and triumphs of people below. And inside the small house on Maple Drive, a family built from brokenness dreamed of the future. A future where the past was only a distant shadow, no longer a threat. A future where children once called worthless would grow up knowing they were loved unconditionally.
A future where love, even when it arrived late and after immeasurable pain, could still bloom. Some scars never fade, but in the right hands, they become proof of survival. And survival is simply another way of speaking about love. The story of the Reynolds family on Maple Drive is a reminder that it's never too late to change, that the past, no matter how dark, doesn't have to define the future, that love can grow in the most unexpected places, and sometimes losing everything is the very way we discover what truly matters. The greatest lesson this story offers is the value of family and the power of choice. Rockman once had everything: power, wealth, respect, yet he nearly lost what was most precious simply because he wasn't there when his children needed him. A busy life can sometimes make us forget that the people we love need our presence more than anything else in the world. Make time for your family, listen to your children, and remember that no success is ever worth it if along the way we lose the ones we love. If this story has touched your heart, if you see yourself or someone you cherish reflected in these characters, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next emotional stories to come. Don't forget to like and share this video with the people you love, because sometimes a single story can change the way we look at life. Leave a comment below so we can talk, share, and connect with one another through these life stories. Tell us, what would you have done in Rockman's position? Would you have chosen power or family? Thank you for spending your time with us today. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and daily peace of mind. Always cherish the people beside you, for they are the greatest treasure you will ever have. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next story.